We are going to continue with the same theme that we've been on most of the afternoon, and that's, talking about how API security exists in the software development lifecycle. And in this next session with Bill Jones from Softrams, we're specifically talking about secure software development frameworks. So maybe I hinted a little bit at that at the end of the last session, but super excited for how API security factors into a secure software development framework. And yeah, I'm excited to hear your talk, Bill. I think we just keep building on kind of the themes, and I'm not sure who was the magic behind how these were stacked up against each other today, but I think it's done, like, they've been great talks that build on, the concepts that we've been learning about since this morning. And so, yeah, with that, take it away, Bill.
Thank you very much. Let me take a look and see the slides here. There we go. Fantastic. So today, my goal is to educate a little bit about the SSDF and go over how it can help your organization create secure APIs from the get-go. There's been a lot of discussion today throughout different speakers with approaching security and APIs. And I think that the SSDF is going to be needed heavily in the future and is already here. So it's a worthy mention to go through and to discuss, how you can position yourself to better understand the SSDF and to work across your teams within your organization to incorporate the practices and policies that will outline the environment in which secure software is created to mitigate vulnerabilities. So that's what I want to hit on today, and I hope that the information is clear and concise as best as possible. So we'll go a little bit over of what the SSDF is. We'll talk a little bit about the practices in a nutshell. Why does it matter? What can we do? API security impact, and most importantly, what you can do following this presentation. So the SSDF is NIST's Secure Software Development Framework, and there's a version 1.1 that was released in 2020, and it's got the added title of Recommendations for Mitigating the Risk of Software Vulnerabilities. There's a bit of a caveat there because it'd be a little misleading. It's more about the development environment and how you are writing practices with policies to enforce standards to create the secure software. So since we're talking about software and APIs are nothing more than just software, by creating a secure development environment from the get-go, the outcome is going to be more secure APIs. So that is pretty much what the SSDF aims to do, and how they're managing to do that is by creating a framework that is more suggestive and more of a guidance piece than it is a checklist or that you have to perform X, Y, and Z. It's really loosely written to give your organization the freedom of flexibility to define what works best for your organization. So when I think about API security, I'm thinking about static code analysis and other penetration techniques for attacking APIs and exposing vulnerabilities within them. But this is a little different because we're championing the creation of secure software at the onset. And I'm pretty sure that will make developers very happy, because when security engineers start attacking the API and tearing it apart, finding broken access controls and other loopholes within the API, we have to kick that back. And if you think about the human journey that's involved with it and the life cycle of that software development, sometimes security isn't viewed in a good light because we're like the crusher of dreams. We're like, oh, this can't be released because there's too many issues within this software. So getting your hands on the SSDF and helping define the practices and what works best for your organization will limit that, because the goal is more secure software from the onset. So I'll stop beating that one up and I'll move on to, I love the industry terms. And right now, shifting left is a term that I see all over the place. So I'm like, shift in whatever direction you need to. If it's left, right, center, doesn't matter. As long as you're moving forward with secure development philosophies and practices, and you're generating APIs that are not going to leak my sensitive data, I'm pretty happy about that. So if you have to shift left or right, it's fine. My only ask is that you shift into the SSDF and go over it and read through it. It's not a very long read. It's a couple pages, and then it lists out a table with the practices and walks through them. So with that, we'll say hello to the NIST 800-218, which is the SSDF. Now, how do I view the practices? I view the practices just how NIST intended, loosely written. They're guidelines. They're not etched in stone. Not, one practice is not more important than another practice. You can mix and match them, choose them, write to each of them. There might be some that your organization just doesn't do, and you can just omit them. But what's important is that you go in with this with the mindset that you're not creating checklists. You're not creating, per se, a defined process. You're creating policy around these practices to give context to them and meaning to them. And I have a slide in the near future here where we'll go over a couple of them at a higher level. The practices are broken out as the main overarching categories of creating that secure development environment to create secure APIs. So I like to view it as like the SSDF is nothing more than an umbrella. And under that umbrella is nothing but practices, and each of those practices contains policies. And those policies specify how we're going to achieve setting up our standards to create secure software. And then we can attest to those policies through the written policies and provide them to vendors or other suppliers that might be interested in purchasing our software or utilizing our APIs for whatever reason. These documents and all other documents, they have to be updated over time. They have to be organic. They have to continuously be improved. They have to continuously grow. Much like every other documentation need in the security realm, every year is the mandatory required time frame to perform some update, or when major modifications occur, we have to perform updates into documentation. What's interesting about that is who is going to perform the updates on this, and how I view that is that it's not just the security engineers, it's not just the security team, it's not just the business leadership team, it's really everyone needs to be involved. Everyone has to come together and decide what works best for individual teams and how do we come together to bridge any kind of gaps that exist when we're defining our practices, and then we're attesting to policies that we've agreed to be followed. Now, the practices are not API security specific. However, it's software. So it does apply to everything that we're doing when developers are creating APIs, or when your organization is delivering APIs to be sold or to be consumed within other services. We live in a very API world now, and it doesn't seem very restful. So these are the practices as outlined by the SSDF according to NIST, preparing the organization, and its focuses on the people, processes, and the technology within the organization, and to prepare them to create secure code. And that's how I interpreted that. Protect the software, protect all components of the software from tampering and unauthorized access. How do we write code that we can deem incredibly secure, but then reuse it? And that's something that comes to mind for me there. Producing well-secured software, with minimal security vulnerabilities in its releases. how do we achieve that? We have other processes in our agile frameworks. We have automated testing. We can check APIs using various tools in the industry. I don't want to mention tools because I don't want to seem like I'm partial to a specific tool or endorsing or sponsoring a given tool, but there's a plethora of tools available, some paid for, some open source, but you have to take what works best for your organization and apply it into that category. Respond to vulnerabilities. If your security team is like my security team, you're constantly checking in and ensuring that vulnerabilities have been monitored after they're discovered, and then they're tracked until remediation and closure. So how do we empower others to do that, or how do we define further than vulnerability management frameworks? But it's what did we learn? I suppose lessons learned from failures that we've experienced, but before they've hit release, before they get out into the wild, and before they can cause actual problems. And I think that's the key to what we're looking for now. There's quite a lot of risk factors involved with that. But let's go over practices. And each of these are outlined. And I only took the first snippet from each practice area in the SSDF to kind of go over what it has in place there. I do encourage you to grab the copy of the SSDF and review the practice areas. They have a lot of great examples within each of them for policies that can be written to determine how your organization will create standards to produce secure software. How will you configure your environments? How will you change things? And again, it's not a checklist. I'm not going to give it to a developer and say, follow this checklist and do only these items. So I do like the fact that they've written it out very loosely and give the organizations a lot of freedom and flexibility to choose what works best for the organization, the people within that organization. So that matters a lot, because a lot of times security can seem like we're handcuffing individuals, and that's never a fun thing. There are certain things we have to do, but whenever we can get everyone involved to make the decision, it's better overall, and we make an even better product out of that. So there are currently 4 practice areas: POPS, PW, and RV. And for an example, under define security requirements for software development, identify and document all security requirements for the organization's software development infrastructure and processes, and maintain the requirements over time. The implementation example for this one is educate affected individuals on impeding changes to requirements. So if we have a pipeline and we're delivering code from a dev environment all the way out into testing, implementation, and production, and we've made changes or anything to that, we would have to make sure that with those changes, we schedule time to educate everyone that will be impacted by those changes. And I don't know about anyone else here, but we work in very fast-paced environments these days. So finding time to schedule an education training session on changes that have occurred can be problematic. But it's something that your organization has to face. You have to work through that, and you have to find out what works best for your organization and the people impacted by these changes. And with the same awareness, then everyone will understand what's going on. And then that will transition into the creation of a more secure API or more secure software. Protect all forms of code from unauthorized access and tampering. Personally, this is one of my favorite things with APIs, is finding flaws with access control issues and getting in and tampering with the APIs. But one of the tasks that NIST has is specify which tools or tool types must or should be included in each tool chain to mitigate identified risk, as well as how the tool chain components are to be integrated with each other. That's a lot to digest. Just reading it now is like, wow, how are we going to meet this? And then an implementation example. Use version control features of the repository to track all changes made to the code with accountability to the individual account, meaning repudiation. We know who made the change. No one else made the change. It was 100% without any question or doubt that the end user that made the change actually made the change. Now, this is just scratching the surface when it comes to DevOps overall and the various processes that will unfold within that working group. So you can kind of see how this practice at the surface level, at the high level, is just scratching the surface. And then NIST is like, we're just nudging you into the direction, and then take all of that hard work that your various teams are doing and create the policies, and then educate those teams to those policies, so that every time we go through, we onboard a new team member, they'll receive the same education, they'll receive the same process flows and the policies and why we're doing things the way we're doing things. And in doing that, we can continually keep building the API, add new features, and everyone will be thinking about security because it's ingrained in each step that we're doing. And there is no need for a checklist there for that now. Sometimes checklists are great. So while the SSDF specifies, you don't need to have these checklists for every process to be followed, I still encourage the use of checklists. I think they're super helpful and they keep people focused. And let's face it, I've read through this SSDF multiple times. I can't memorize the whole thing or remember every single statement that was made within the document. So small notes, checklist, and sharing of information, that's how we can empower each other to build more secure software. So the next one is design software to meet security requirements and mitigate security risks. Use forms of risk modeling, such as threat modeling, attack modeling, or attack surface mapping to help assess the security risk for the software. And one of the implementation examples that is given in the SSDF is review vulnerability reports and statistics for previous software to inform the security risk assessment. So with our last release or with our last X number of releases, how many issues did we have? How many escaped our security checks and actually made it into production and were found later? What is our escape rate? What can we do better? What are we learning from this information? How do we improve our practice? How do we adjust the policies under this practice to make improvements? Because it's iterative. So today it might be working well. 6 months from now, technology changes incredibly fast. These practice and policies, they need to be tweaked. They need to be updated. Tool chains can be swapped out. And like earlier, it was mentioned, if you swap out the tool chain, you have to educate users on these changes and why these changes are being made. Something that I would add to that is what changes would the individuals in the organization like to see with a policy update, or through that iterative process and having open discussions? What input is there? So I would keep all of that in mind as I'm building out the policies for each of these practice areas. And last but not least, identify and confirm vulnerabilities on an ongoing basis. The task would include gather information from software acquirers, users, and public sources on potential vulnerabilities in the software and third-party components, on the software, or it is in the software and third-party components that the software uses, and investigate all credible reports. That can be exhausting. So automation is key. And in fact, automation is key in a lot of these areas. Pipelines automate whatever possible, as few manual inspection checks as needed. But for this one, use threat intelligence sources to better understand how vulnerabilities in general are being exploited. Something that we like to do at Softrams is follow the CISA guidelines and the bulletins that come out, and then track that against our software inventory in automated fashion so that we can understand the risk that we face overall and the threats that are changing in the industry. And then that allows us to think differently about how we target our APIs and how we attack them. Because as those attacks change over time, we have to learn and adapt as well. So something that I would have in there related to that again, and I think there's been a silver lining here, is education. It's educating on everything that is changing, educating on the changes that are made, and just following the industry overall, the attack actors and the attack patterns, and adapting and learning from those to incorporate into the policy documents and then adjust them over time as needed. And by doing that, the SSDF framework, or the mindset within this framework, the goal of creating a more secure future with APIs is possible. So why does it matter? Well, it matters because I don't want my health information leaked. I don't want my bank data leaked. I don't want my family and friends having their data leaked. It's not fun. Once you get on list and then it transmits throughout, the dark web and it's sold off, you don't know what is happening behind the scenes because you cannot see everything that's taking place with the data that has leaked about you. So advocating any secure practice that's available to build more secure APIs is something that I'm going to champion. But for APIs specifically, focusing on modular code that is hardened, it's been battle worn and tested. It doesn't have any weaknesses at the current time. That's the caveat, is with time, things get cracked and broken, and vulnerabilities will surface that were previously unthought of, but it will follow defined processes and policies for updating, and the next iteration of the software would have incorporated the required patching to remove that vulnerability or risk to the system. Your organization can apply the SSDF framework, and by doing that and putting all that work and attesting to your best practices and the policies that you've put in place to generate secure software, in this case, an API that you wish to sell out into the industry, you're going to get more visibility and traction in the industry overall. You're going to have people building confidence right away in the quality of work that you're putting out, and feel free to let them inspect what you're doing. Of course, I would do that under an NDA. I wouldn't just broadcast all of my policies online. There are threat actors out there that I'm sure would love to have that information, and then to use that to find weaknesses within your policies and gaps that they can exploit. But it's really interesting to, see how it comes together. What can we do? Well, when you're incorporating the SSDF, train your organization, train your people, get them involved, get the feedback, and for the pipeline activities that DevOps performs, how can it be automated? How can you secure it? How does that translate into a better API? Do we add in more automated checking? Do we have information about all of the key data points within this API? Did we do the threat modeling? Did we do the attack modeling? Did we get it through all the vigorous tests that we expect? And we wrote that out through our practices. And then we've defined policies that showcase what we're using within that pipeline. And that's kind of how they come together. The practice is the high level, the policy is the in-between, and then that end result is a highly secure API or highly secure software, because you haven't deviated. Everyone is standardized and fixed on this process. And again, that's going to bolster your organization's reputation. And more people would be inclined to use your software because they're not afraid that you're going to be leaking their data, which is, a hot topic as of last year and this year, and with growing threats. API security impact. From the SSDF, and I've hit on this a little bit throughout, but it isn't the end all be all. It's a good start, but it's designed for your organization to take over and run with it, build it out, and define what works well for you on the software that you're developing. How does your environment generate secure software? It's secured from the get-go. So your API is going to be way more secure than, say, a developer out there who had a great idea, generated the API, and just put it out there online to be consumed. Probably not a good idea. I would highly advise against that. But it is, probable in the world that we live in, with APIs can do anything, and with anything will happen. Trust is being built from your company into the industry. Your API will get recognized for having security standards in place. And training is a huge part of all of this. Train your people, train on the implementation changes, create that awareness, broadcasting, get people together, get people collaborating on these changes. And most importantly, throughout all of this, in addition to the risk and factors such as cost, feasibility, and applicability, all of that should be considered when deciding which SSDF practice to use and how much time and resources to devote into each practice. So again, it's not one size fits all. $1 billion corporation might be able to have a larger budget allocated into the creation of these practices and policies and embedding different software checks and really writing them out well. A startup that doesn't really have a large funding opportunity and has to grow from the ground up and then do outreach to build its potential client base isn't going to have the budget required to build out everything, and will have to rely on other software avenues such as open source software. But with that being said, request under an NDA, most likely, the SSD, get to know the practices and policies of the software that you're consuming within your APIs. And I think that's the largest component of this, is understand the security posture of the software that you're implementing into your software to release into the world. Because the last thing you want is a third-party library or a third-party API that you've integrated with exposing data within your system. So keep an eye on that. And with that, I turn that over. Thank you, Christine, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Bill. That was a great talk. And I think, there were two things that really stuck with me that you said, and I'll leave everyone with those as we head into the break. But you said, very specifically that everyone needs to be involved. And I think that's really important, right? So as you're creating these policies, as you're looking at which practices make sense for your organization, everyone has to be involved. And that this is a living organism, right? Like these can't be written and just etched in stone and forgotten. So I think those are both really important points. And yeah, I appreciate you taking the time to educate all of us on how we can, take these frameworks and make them specific and successful in our own organizations. So thank you, Bill. We are headed into a 25-minute break, about 20 minutes now. We'll be back